For decades, the B-1 Lancer has haunted the sky. Born for nuclear war, rebuilt for modern battle, and pushed far beyond what anyone expected. But how did an aircraft designed for the Cold War become one of the most trusted strike platforms of the 21st century? The story behind that is more complex than you might think. In the early 1970s, the United States faced a brutal strategic reality. Soviet radar networks and surface-to-air missile systems had grown dense and deadly enough that the Air Force's cornerstone bomber, the B-52, was increasingly vulnerable. Flying high and slow was no longer survivable in a modern nuclear war. What the U.S. needed was a bomber that could travel intercontinental distances, carry a massive nuclear payload, and still force its way through the thickest Soviet air defenses. So, Rockwell's answer was the B-1A Lancer, a bold, aggressive design built around variable sweep wings that could extend forward for efficient takeoff and long-range cruise, then sweep sharply back for high-speed dash. Powered by 4 General Electric F101 afterburning turbofans, each producing over 30,000 pounds of thrust, the B-1A was designed to reach over Mach 2 at altitude, and it was meant to be a weapon that relied on raw performance to survive. To be honest, the B-1A looked unstoppable. It was faster than most fighters, able to carry a strategic nuclear load, incapable of crossing continents in a single mission. Yet despite all that promise, the United States built only 4 prototypes before abruptly canceling the program. Still, how does a bomber this advanced end up grounded before it ever enters service? The answer had less to do with engineering and more to do with changing strategy. As the B-1A was being tested, U.S. planners began to question whether speed alone was still the best defense. Air-launched cruise missiles allowed older B-52s to strike from hundreds of miles away, while early stealth research hinted that avoiding radar altogether might be safer than trying to outrun it. As a result, in June 1977, President Jimmy Carter officially canceled full-scale B-1A production, calling it an expensive system made redundant by cruise missiles and evolving technology. For most aircraft, cancellation is the end of the story. Programs disappear, prototypes are retired, and the idea quietly fades away. But the B-1 didn't vanish. Years after its death, it kept appearing in flight logs and test reports. If the bomber was obsolete, why did the Air Force keep flying it? Because the Air Force never stopped learning from it. The 4 B-1As became flying laboratories, used to push the limits of high-speed, low-altitude flight. Test crews explored how a massive bomber could skim just a few hundred feet above the ground, using terrain to hide from radar instead of brute speed at altitude. Those years of testing quietly proved something critical. Survivability didn't require being unseen. It could also come from being fast, low, and unpredictable. When political winds shifted in the early 1980s, that hard-earned data became the backbone for reviving the design as a very different aircraft, the B-1B. If you're enjoying this breakdown of the B-1 Lancer so far, make sure you're subscribed to Jet HQ. And if you already are, this is your reminder to tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next. By the late 1970s, the official story around the B-1 seemed settled. The B-1A had been canceled, cruise missiles would handle long-range nuclear strikes, and a future stealth bomber would eventually take over the penetration role. In the meantime, upgraded B-52s were expected to hold the line. But of course, strategy never stays frozen. As the Cold War rolled into the 1980s, Soviet air defenses kept getting faster, smarter, and the United States still didn't have a stealth bomber ready for real-world deployment. When Ronald Reagan entered the White House, his administration pushed for a stronger, more visible nuclear deterrent. Suddenly, the years of data gathered from those supposedly dead B-1A test flights didn't look wasted at all. Instead of resurrecting the B-1A exactly as it was, the Air Force and Rockwell chose a different path. They redesigned the aircraft around a new core mission, surviving by flying low. The reborn bomber wasn't a pure speed demon anymore. It was something tougher, darker, and more purposeful. This new aircraft would be called the B-1B. Compared to the sleek B-1A, the B-1B was heavier, slower, and far less glamorous on a spec sheet. So what exactly did the Air Force gain by giving up raw Mach 2 speed in exchange for something that looked, at least on paper, like a downgrade? First, survivability. The B-1B's airframe was strengthened to endure sustained low-altitude flight, allowing it to stay close to the ground for hours instead of relying on brief high-speed dashes. Its radar cross-section was reduced to roughly 1/10 that of the B-1A through smoother shaping, redesigned engine inlets, and radar-absorbing materials. Then the top speed dropped to around Mach 1.25, but at the altitudes where the B-1B was meant to fight, that trade-off made sense. It's obvious that tougher structure and reduced detectability mattered far more than a supersonic sprint that would only make the bomber easier to spot. But design changes alone don't win wars. In real combat, they needed to see how a low-level, semi-stealthy bomber like the B-1B actually fought differently from the B-52s it was meant to complement, not replace. That all comes down to how it attacks. The B-1B uses terrain-following radar to fly as low as 200 feet above the ground at high subsonic speed, letting hills, valleys, and even Earth's curvature block enemy radar. Instead of broadcasting its presence from high altitude, it snakes through terrain, appearing only briefly to release weapons before vanishing again. And combined with its massive payload and increasingly advanced avionics, this low-level profile transformed the B-1B into a true penetration bomber built to slip past integrated air defenses at night, in bad weather, and in a world already racing towards stealth. Well, if you're wondering why the B-1B Lancer earns names like Bone and Sky Beast, it's because its ferocity doesn't come from a single feature. It comes from how everything about it is built to support raw, controlled aggression. Let's start with the frame. The B-1B is roughly 146 feet long, with a wingspan stretching to about 137 feet when fully extended, and a maximum takeoff weight pushing 477,000 pounds. Those numbers alone put it closer to a freight train than a fighter jet, but its defining feature is the variable sweep wing. With the wings forward, the aircraft generates massive lift, allowing it to haul fuel and weapons off relatively short runways. Just sweep them back and drag drops sharply, letting the bomber accelerate past 900 miles per hour, around Mach 1.2, making it the fastest bomber in the U.S. inventory. However, that flexibility raises an obvious question. Most aircraft are optimized for one regime, like slow and heavy or fast and light. The B-1B insists on doing both. So how does something this big move like that without tearing itself apart? Well, it's all about power. The four General Electric F101 GE F102 afterburning turbofans sit buried under the wing roots, each producing over 30,000 pounds of thrust. That engine setup gives the B-1B the ability to climb aggressively, accelerate hard, and, most importantly, hold very high subsonic speed at low altitude, where thick air and drag punish most aircraft. This is what allows a machine weighing hundreds of thousands of pounds to skim just 200 feet above the ground at roughly Mach 0.9, following terrain instead of flying over it. Inside, a crew of 4 manages the beast. Pilot and co-pilot sit up front, while offensive and defensive systems officers in the rear control weapons, sensors, and electronic warfare. Even early B-1Bs were more digitally advanced than older bombers. But later, integrated battle station upgrades replaced aging displays with full-color glass screens, modern data links, and better diagnostics, crucial for night operations, bad weather, and high-threat airspace. Then deep in the fuselage are 3 internal weapons bays capable of carrying roughly 75,000 pounds of ordnance, the largest conventional internal payload of any U.S. bomber. That means it can carry dozens of precision JDAMs, heavy 2,000-pound bombs, naval mines, and standoff weapons like JASSM and JASSM-ER cruise missiles. Add over 200 to 65,000 pounds of fuel capacity and mid-air refueling, and the Bone can cross oceans, loiter for hours, and still hit hard. All right, quick pause before we break another airplane apart. If you think the Bone earned its reputation the hard way, hit like and share this with someone who still underestimates bombers. And for more aircraft pushed past their limits, subscribe to Jet HQ. And when that machine was finally sent into combat, it proved it belonged there. Because for all its Cold War planning, the B-1B's reputation wasn't forged in nuclear drills or theoretical penetration routes. It was forged the first time it was sent into combat for something it was never originally designed to do. In December 1998, during Operation Desert Fox, the Bone flew its first combat missions, striking Iraqi targets with conventional weapons. It wasn't racing under Soviet radar or sprinting toward nuclear release points. Instead, it was dropping precision bombs in a limited regional conflict. That moment quietly rewrote its future. From there, the B-1B became a constant presence in American air campaigns for Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, transforming from a Cold War penetration bomber into something far more flexible. What kept bringing it back wasn't just raw firepower, it was availability, endurance, and the ability to stay overhead long after other aircraft had to leave. A typical B-1 mission could last 10 hours or more, sometimes stretching past 15 with multiple aerial refuelings. Jets launched from bases like Dias or Ellsworth, topped off over friendly airspace, and still arrived over the battlefield carrying tens of thousands of pounds of precision weapons, with enough fuel to loiter for hours afterward. This is where the Bone's role shifted again. Armed with JDAMs and targeting pods, it became airborne artillery. In Afghanistan and Iraq, B-1 crews routinely provided close air support, working directly with ground controllers to drop single GPS-guided bombs within meters of friendly troops. And instead of flying only pre-planned strike routes, Bones orbited on call, waiting, listening, then diving in when soldiers asked for help over the radio. In other missions, the B-1B acted as a true bomb truck. With 3 internal bays full of JDAMs, a single aircraft could service multiple target coordinates in one pass, ripple weapons across dispersed enemy positions, or hit time-sensitive targets spread across an entire region. Its speed allowed it to be retasked mid-flight, sprinting from one part of a theater to another far faster than slower heavy bombers. But pushing a bomber this hard for this long comes at a cost. The Bone was built as a Cold War sprinter, not a forever on-call workhorse. So what happens when your Sky Beast spends years flying long, hot combat sorties instead of the short nuclear runs it was designed for? At this point, by the 2010s, the answer was showing up in maintenance logs. At times, nearly 70% of the B-1 fleet was deployed to the Middle East, far beyond the roughly 40% deployment rate the Air Force considers healthy for a bomber force. That relentless tempo took its toll. Structural fatigue, cracked longerons, engine wear, and avionics failures forced stand-downs and emergency inspections. Soon, several jets were pulled from service or retired early, not because enemy fire brought them down, but because they had simply been flown almost to exhaustion. The same traits that made the Bone indispensable were its range, payload, and flexibility. And those same traits made commanders lean on it harder than it was ever meant to be used. And that pressure set up the next challenge. If this Sky Beast was wearing out, how do they keep it alive and lethal deep into the 21st century? If you've made it this far, you're clearly into aircraft stories like this. Drop a like, stick with Jet HQ, and let's finish this properly. After 2 decades of non-stop combat deployments, the B-1B fleet was battered, but far from done. The Air Force never retired the bomber outright, but the U.S. Air Force made a deliberate choice to shrink the fleet, focus resources, and treat the remaining Bones like high-value assets rather than expendable workhorses. This wasn't about nostalgia, it was about buying time. The B-21 Raider was coming, but not fast enough to leave a gap in long-range strike capability. So the mission shifted from how hard can we fly the B-1 to how smart can we keep it alive. That decision reshaped upgrades, maintenance philosophy, even which airframes were allowed to survive. However, the B-1B was built for speed and violence, not longevity, yet the Air Force chose to double down on a bomber already showing its age. The centerpiece of that bet is the Integrated Battle Station upgrade. Finished across roughly 60 jets by 2020, IBS replaced outdated analog systems with a full-glass cockpit, modern data links, and a central integrated test system that detects faults in real time. For crews, that meant better situational awareness, faster retargeting, and fewer surprise failures halfway through a 12-hour mission. Also, on the ground, maintenance got smarter too. Programs like Beast, the B-1 embracing agile scheduling team, collapsed long upgrade cycles into focused visits lasting about 22 days. Instead of disappearing into hangars for months, aircraft came back faster, upgraded, and mission-ready. Still, there's another problem. Modern avionics solve awareness and reliability, but they don't stop metal from getting tired. So what about it? To deal with that reality, engineers began full-scale structural testing, stressing entire fuselages and wings to pinpoint where cracks form and how much life remains. In 2021, the Air Force retired 17 of the most worn airframes, concentrating money and manpower on the healthiest 45 to improve overall readiness. The result is a leaner but stronger fleet. While no longer nuclear certified, the modernized Bone remains one of the most powerful conventional strike platforms on Earth, capable of hauling massive JDAM loads, launching JASSM and LRSM cruise missiles, and potentially carrying future hypersonic weapons. The B-1B is no longer the future, it's the bridge. And as long as that bridge holds, the Sky Beast still earns its keep. By now, the B-1B is expensive, worn, and no longer nuclear armed. Yet why does the U.S. Air Force still talk about it with so much respect? Well, quick pause. The last one. If you've made it this far, you're clearly into aircraft stories like this. Drop a like, and let's finish this properly. At first glance, the B-1B looks like a bomber caught between eras. Born for nuclear war, stripped of that mission, flown relentlessly in conventional combat, and slowly edged toward retirement as stealth took over. By the usual rules, that should have made it a footnote. But the Bone didn't fail its original purpose, it outgrew it. When the Cold War ended, the B-1B reinvented itself in real combat. In Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, it became something no one fully planned for. A fast, long-range, on-call strike platform that ground forces trusted when things went wrong. When it finally leaves the flight line, the B-1B won't be remembered as outdated, just as one of the hardest working sky beasts the Air Force ever flew. So what do you think? Did the B-1B outgrow its original mission, or did it completely redefine what a bomber is supposed to be? And in modern warfare, what matters more? Stealth or adaptability? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you're here, you probably love deep dives like this, and the next one is already waiting for you. Our breakdown of America's rumored hypersonic monster, the SR-91 Aurora.